Hello and welcome back, everyone. As we move into section 3.7, we will look at some important HTML developers guideline. These are best practices that help us write clean, consistent, and maintainable code. Following guidelines ensure that our web pages are easier to read, debug, and update, not just for us, but for anyone else who might work on the project in the future. Think of this as the good habits section of HTML, where we learn the rules that make our code professional and reliable. Closing tags. So, when writing HTML code, it's important to always include closing tags for your elements. For example, while standard HTML does not strictly require a closing paragraph tag because browser can infer the end of a paragraph, it's considered a good practice to include it. Adding the closing tag explicitly ensures that your code is clear and avoids any unexpected rendering issues. A common mistake developers often make is assuming that all browsers will handle missing closing tags the same way. But in reality, different browsers may interrupt missing tags differently, thus leading to inconsistent results. Um, Moving on, good practices in development when writing clean and reliable HTML. There are few good practices every developer should follow. These practices not only make your code more consistent, but also prevent errors that can occur in different browsers or frameworks. Let's go through them step by step. First, avoid using self-closing tags. So while you might see something like the break tag or BR tag, used, the proper and safer form in HTML is simply BR. Self-closing tags are most common in XML, so sticking to standard HTML helps you avoid confusion. Next, um, just always use quotes around attribute values. For example, instead of writing value equal to start, you should write value equal to um, start inside a quotation. So even though quotes are not strictly required, but when value has no spaces, forgetting them when there are spaces will break your code. By consistently using quotes, you make your HTML safer and easier to read. And finally, remember to use double quotes consistently for attribute values. Both single and double quotes are valid in HTML, but using double quotes like um, value equal to double quote start is considered the best practice. This consistency is especially important when working with frameworks where mismatched quotes can cause errors. If you do need to include a double quote inside a value, you must escape it. For example, value equal to he said and quote and start and quote double quotation. By following this practice, avoiding self-closing tags, always quoting attributes, and consistently using double quotes, you will ensure your HTML is clean, professional, and less prone to bugs. Some more good practices. For writing HTML code. These build on what we just covered and help avoid common mistakes when dealing with attributes and elements. Um, First, when you need to use a special character like a double quote inside an attribute value, you must skip it. This is done by placing a backslash before the special character so that it loses its special meaning. For example, um, alt David D slash uh Ike slash Eisenhower. Here the backslash makes sure the quotes around Ike L key don't break the attribute. And second, remember the concept of Boolean attributes. A Boolean attribute is true when present and false when absent. For example, with checkboxes, the checked attribute is Boolean. If you write in input type equal to checkbox checked, the box will be selected by default simply because the attribute is there. Finally, pay attention to the layout of block and inline elements. Each block and inline element, like paragraph table or ordered list, should always begin on a new line as they represent larger structure component of the page. Inline elements, for example, the anchor tag, the span, or the Q tag don't need a new line since they follow naturally within text. However, for readability, it's still a good practice to start them on a new line when your code gets long. By skipping special characters, using Boolean attributes properly, and respecting the difference between block and inline elements, you make your HTML cleaner, more readable, and less error prone. So, when writing HTML, nested elements should always be intended by at least two spaces. This makes it very clear which elements belong inside others. For example, list items, list element inside an ordered list element should be intended to visually show their relationship. Equally important is consistent indentation throughout a file. Inconsistency can make the code very difficult to read and maintain, especially for larger projects. Um, so here, notice in the table how the good example uses neat, consistent indentation for HTML head and body tags, while the bad example is messy and harder to follow. So think of indentation as giving your code a clean and professional look, just like proper grammar in writing. Indentation makes your HTML easier for both you and others to understand. Let's continue with more good practices in HTML development, this time focusing on CSS and JavaScript usage. First, while it is technically possible to write CSS or JavaScript directly in your HTML using inline styles or embedded code, this approach is not recommended. For example, instead of writing this way, you should write this way, um, and then define the attention class in your CSS file. This makes your code cleaner, more usable, and easier to maintain. Secondly, it is always better to use separate files for CSS and JavaScript rather than mixing them directly into the HTML. These separation ensures that your HTML remains focused on the structure while your CSS handles the styling and JavaScript handles the behavior. So this way, your project is more organized and professional, and also improves the performance since the browser can cache CSS and JavaScript files. So, when working with a web development, it is very important to follow practices that keep your code clean and accessible. The table element should be reserved strictly for displaying tabular data, not for arranging a web page's layout. Using tables for layout might seem convenient, but it makes the structure harder to understand, less flexible, and more difficult to style properly with CSS. Another essential habit is to validate your HTML. Validation ensures that your code follows a web standard, making it more likely to display correctly across different browsers. Even small mistakes can lead to inconsistent rendering, so catching them early is important. You can use the W3C official validator at http://validator.w3.org, which is a free tool provided by the World Wide Web Consortium. It allows you to check your HTML by entering a web page URL, uploading an HTML file, or directly pasting the HTML code. Validating and fixing errors not only improves browser compatibility but also makes your web page more professional and reliable. Now, This slide demonstrates how proper developer guidelines are applied in practice. First, all elements are written with their closing tags, such as the paragraph closing tag or list closing tag, ensuring the browser interprets the structure consistently. Attribute values are placed inside double quotes, which is the safest and most likely accepted convention. Boolean attributes like checked are also used correctly, meaning they are present only when true. In addition, all tags and attributes are written in lowercase, making the code more consistent and easier to read. Proper indentation, highlights, and nesting of elements, which helps both readability and maintainability. Block elements like paragraph or ordered list always begin with new line, further improving the clarity. And external resources are handled properly, for like using separate CSS and JavaScript files are very important with the link and script elements instead of embedding them directly in the HTML, to help cleaner and easier uh, to manage codes. And finally, table element is used only for tabular data, not for arranging the layout of the total web page. So this ensures the design is controlled using CSS rather than outdated tables based layouts. So that's all for chapter 3.7 and chapter 3. From the next module, we will start learning and implementing CSS. I hope to see you all in the next module. Thank you.